Here I am. And now it looks like I've got sound, but I
Okay.
can't tell. Are you hearing me?
I haven't loaded you
Yep.
yet, so
Okay.
we're good.
So we're hoping for the best, uh, and we are now live. And hopefully, we actually have sound this time, and it will all work. So,
Yes.
if I
Sound is on. You're ready. You're good.
sound is on, okay. So if I haven't lost everybody, I should have been saying I'm a hostage or something. I'm,
And hopefully,
I'm a hostage to Facebook's having changed their program every time we do this. All right, I'm hanging up with you, Paul,
okay, bye.
and hopefully somebody will write in there, aha, Sam says check. Yes, there's sound. Thank God. All right. Um, well, that was dramatic. Um, okay, so we're off to a little bit late start, and sorry about that. Um, I am just going to go ahead and get started and tell you guys what's going on with Lost Treasures and the Louis L'Amour program and other things. Um, First of all, if you guys would like to go out and check out the Jamestown Revival.com webpage. Jamestown Revival is a wonderful folk group out of Austin, two great guys who are friends of mine, and they did an album based on Louis L'Amour stories. So they took the first first six stories out of Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures Volume One, and they adapted them into into songs, and they're pretty terrific. I was very very happy with the results, and I think you guys will enjoy them uh, a lot. So go to Jamestown, one word, revival.com, and and see what the guys are up to, because it's a great little EP or kind of short album. Um, we're going to start off with what's going on with Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures. I'm going to tell you all about that. I'll probably tell you a couple other things, and then we'll have a Q&A. And so you can, uh, you can get some more. Paul was just good enough to post the Jamestown Revival link in the feed, so that's good. So, all right, this year for Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures postscripts, for anyone who doesn't know, the Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures program is one where I'm going through the books, and anytime that there is kind of a story behind the story, um, or interesting facts about what Louis was doing with that novel or in with the short stories in that particular book of short stories. I'm writing that story, and we're putting it in sort of like bonus features in the back. So when you get done reading the novel, you can just continue on and read the Lost Treasures postscript. Every one of them is different. They are Sometimes it will be the story of researching the story. Sometimes it's how Louis came to write it. Sometimes it's the story of how the movie got made. They're all really quite different. And so this year we have we don't have the book out yet. We have the Key Lock Man. This is not a Louis L'Amour Lost Treasures version. The Lost Treasures versions have this banner at the top that say Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures, but this one's coming out in a little while, and we don't even have the cover yet. So we have the Key Lock Man. The Key Lock Man is based on the short story Dutchman's Flat, and so I talk a little bit about that. One of the interesting things is that one of the locations in the Key Lock Man is No Man's Mesa, which also shows up in the novel Haunted Mesa. And the Key Lock Man actually spends a little time on top of No Man's Mesa. and talks about some wild horses up there and some other things. Now, what's interesting about that is I have always wondered whether my dad was on top of No Man's Mesa early in his life or not. He said he thought he was. He came through that area in the 1920s, but rather typically you're driving dirt roads through Arizona in the 1920s, and it's the first time you've ever seen Monument Valley, and it's late in the day and things like this. And he wasn't 100% sure where he was. And he also mentioned at another time he thought perhaps he'd been a bit more further north, actually closer to Cortez, Colorado. But then he writes this story, and this was before he had good maps. This was before we had visited No Man's Mesa. And he did a pretty accurate job of describing the topography on the top of the mesa and the fact that wild horses could get up there somehow. I've been all around No Man's Mesa. I've been on the top of it. I've looked all over, and I can hardly believe that a wild horse could get up there. But my friend, novelist Doug Preston, has been around in that area, and he's also familiar with the fact that wild horses go up there. And so it seems that that's actually a legitimate thing. And so, interestingly, this is kind of confirmation that that's where Dad was when he climbed that mesa in the 20s. And so, anyway, a bunch of that information is going to be in the Lost Treasures edition, soon to come, of The Key Lock Man. Next, we have The Empty Land. And so we already obviously have the Lost Treasures edition of The Empty Land. And that Lost Treasures just deals with some of the early drafts of the story and how Dad was trying to find an efficient way of starting it, but one that also dealt with the scope of the story, which is both very large and very small at times. And so he started it very much like a conventional Western with a bunch of action a couple of times. And then when he actually wrote the novel, the version that was published, he went back, and the first chapter actually talks a lot about the geology and how the gold that was in this particular place that eventually is the reason for the boom camp that is the location of the story, how that gold became exposed and people were able to find it. So the first chapter covers like 3,000 or 4,000 years. It's a wonderful kind of descriptive piece of geology. And in fact, there was a geology professor, a professor of earth sciences at Stanford, that used to use it in his classes and used to say, "Oh, if you really want to know, if you really want to read a good description of geology at work, read the first chapter of Beau L'Amour's The Empty Land." But as long as we're talking about The Empty Land, I will tell you a story that I did not put in print and I did not put in the postscript. So this is a special thing for us right now. Back in the late 1980s, I was attempting to get things going for some of our projects in the movie business. And one of the projects we had been trying to sell was The Empty Land. And we didn't get too much action on it until Unforgiven came out. And of course, the next week, Unforgiven opened to like $30 million on its first weekend, and suddenly we were getting calls like crazy. And so I went to a particular network and discussed a project that would become The Empty Land. And we got all ready to go. And the one thing I said to them was, I said, please, until we have a script, don't call any actors. Let's just get the script done before we do it. And of course, immediately what happened was, probably no sooner did I leave the office than they got in touch with an actor, and the process started to kind of fall apart. And the actor was miffed, probably, that we hadn't gone to him first rather than going to the network. and maybe I don't know what the problem was, but it there was tension, you know, almost immediately. And the other thing that was an issue, and has been an issue, you know, was an issue throughout the whole development of this script, which ultimately went nowhere. There, and then some other people bought it, and they did a script, and that also went nowhere. But this first script was, nobody really recognized, at least in my opinion, that this is it would be a buddy movie. It's not about, there isn't sort of one hero. There are two kind of dueling heroes. There's Matt Coburn, who is the kind of cynical marshal who's hired to kind of take care of this boomtown, and there's another man named Felton, who's more like a politician, more like a, you know, guy who may end up being mayor or on the town, you know, commission or something of the sort. And it nobody would ever really kind of agree that that other part was an important element to kind of to really get the drama of the story going. And my dad knew it well because let me see if I can find it. He dedicated it to his father. So he dedicated it to my father, who knew what it meant to wear the badge. So my grandfather was a town constable, but he was also, you know, he was also like one of those county board guys. He was also a politician type person, and it was really a lot of the story was really about the dueling needs of law enforcement and city government, how they're not necessarily always the same thing. The project continued. We actually had two writers on it, one, and then when he went away, another. They had both won Academy Awards, and neither one of them did a particularly good script. It just shows you that no matter what you've written in the past, and they won Academy Awards for movies. I'm not going to mention who they were. That would be unfair and probably kind of rude, but they both won Academy Awards for movies that you would have a lot of respect for. Let's just put it that way. So anyway, that project ultimately collapsed because those scripts didn't work, and then it was picked up by another writer, and there was another actor, and there was another writer put on it, and that didn't go anywhere either. So that's just a little extra that I didn't put in the Lost Treasures afterward, or postscript to The Empty Land. The next one we have is Taggart, and Taggart is an elaboration of Dad's short story Trap of Gold. And just to diverge for a moment, Trap of Gold is also one of the stories that the Jamestown Revival guys did a song about. It's called Prospector's Blues, and so hopefully you'll go and enjoy that. And I tell a number of things about Trap of Gold. Probably the most interesting, or not Trap of Gold, but Taggart. One of the most interesting things about Taggart, however, was the connection between my father and Katharine Hepburn. So my dad had a movie made from his novel Heller with a Gun, and the director was George Cukor, and one of his friends was Katharine Hepburn. My dad and Katharine Hepburn met at a party at George Cukor's house, and they had a good time talking to one another. We're not talking about a deep friendship here, but they communicated back and forth. And my dad felt like she expressed some interest in working on one of his stories and being an actress in the movie version of one of his stories. And he was at the time working on Taggart. And when he was done with it, because they had talked about it, he sent it to her. She was a bit too old for the part in Hella with a Gun. I don't know that she was ever even seriously considered. When she read Taggart, she got back to my dad and she said, I'm not really right for either of these parts. She was very, and gave a very intelligent description of why. And then she said this fascinating thing. She said, what I really want is, whenever I read a Western, what I want to do is be the male lead. Okay, so if you know anything about Katharine Hepburn, this is not really surprising. And she went on about it, and I quote that in the postscript, more than I will do here. But my dad took it very seriously, and quite a few years later, he wrote another book that was designed for Katharine Hepburn to be made into a movie with Katharine Hepburn playing a part that was as intense and interesting and dynamic as any male part in any Western. And that novel is Kiowa Trail. So his discussions with Katharine Hepburn about Taggart inspired him to write the character of Kate Lundy. Notice Kate and Kate. Kate Lundy in Kiowa Trail. The story went on just a little bit longer because, again, another number of years later, my dad was approached to write a script to the sequel to Rooster Cogburn, which was Katharine Hepburn and John Wayne. And I am almost certain that the reason that Dad was approached to write that script, he did not end up writing the script, but the reason he was offered that particular job was because Katharine Hepburn wanted to work with him. We go on to, we're having kind of a special, so those are the books for this year, but I'm not sure if any of you know what there are these ebook specials that we do occasionally where you can get the ebook for very little money. And so BookBub is doing one of these promotions, and the promotion is going to be The Walking Drum and No Traveler Returns. So the BookBub promotion for The Walking Drum is going to be from September 24th to September 28th, and it will be discounted to $1.99. And you can get that. You can find the discounted book ebook on Amazon or any of the ebook retailers, but of course Amazon's the biggest one. And then on October 4th, they're going to do a special for $1.99 on No Traveler Returns. So because of that, I'm going to talk a little bit about those two books. So here we have the Lost Treasures edition of The Walking Drum. And I'll describe a little bit about what's in the Lost Treasures postscript. So its origins, the book was actually written, it didn't come out until 1984, but it was actually written around 1960. And in the late 1950s, Dad was very much trying to change his career. He'd been quite successful writing Westerns, and he wanted to leverage that success into writing books of all different genres. And so he started putting queries out, and he started offering different publishers projects of different sorts that were not Westerns. A fair number of the books that are in, or the beginnings of books that are in the LAmours Lost Treasures Volume 1 and 2 are from that period. So that was a lot of those beginnings of stories and planned stories and things like that were the stories that he was intending to work on if he was able to break away from writing Westerns, writing 4 Westerns a year. I think he was hoping to get it down to maybe 1 or 2 and being able to write some other things. So The Walking Drum, kind of had its origins in the late 50s when Dad was trying to change his career. One of the projects that he worked on was a nonfiction book that he tried to sell on I believe he was Moroccan or North African adventurer and explorer named Ibn Battuta, who was this amazing traveler and uh, wrote a travelogue of traveling all over the known world in the I can't remember. It was not quite as early as the Kerbershard stories, but it was before the high years of the Renaissance, so very early. And that book was not received by publishers very well, or that book proposal was not received very well. But I think Dad was inspired by it to write kind of a fictional version of it, and that was The Walking Drum. He wrote it, like I said, around 1960. Did not get anywhere with it with various publishers. He rewrote it in the late 60s. He rewrote it again in the late 70s, and was finally able to sell it in 1984. Also, what you will find in the Lost Treasures postscript of that book is a pretty good outline of what a sequel to The Walking Drum would have been like. And that I took maybe 3 or 4 outlines that he did for the book, and I kind of mixed and matched them to try and get one that was as complete as possible and one that included all of his various ideas rather than, some of them were complete, but they didn't have all the ideas that the other ones did. So I tried to sort of sort them into the right order so it would feel like here's every idea that Louis had for a sequel to The Walking Drum. And now let's see, I'll get down to, I think we're at about 6:30, so I think it's probably a good idea to answer some questions. So I might have gotten some earlier, but if you wrote one earlier, pop back in and write it now, so I don't have to go crazy scrolling around, because that always makes everybody nuts while I'm looking for a question. But if you've got any questions, now is the moment to lay them on me. And so, of course, the other book that's going to be on the book club promotion is No Traveler Returns, which is a book that I really wrote with my dad. So he did a good deal of it, but it was like a pile of chapters, and then I sort of turned it into a complete novel. So we have a question here. Any plans to make No Traveler into a Leatherette edition? Okay, so the Leatherette program was closed down. They are still delivering some books to people who are completing their sets, but they're not taking any new people. And so the LAmours the collected short stories of Louis L'Amour, Volume 7, is the last book that came out as part of the Leatherette series. And so No Traveler Returns will not be one of them. And okay, so now I'm going back to look at the questions here. There needs to be a book about your dad, a memoir. Well, he did a memoir. Memoir is really kind of what you remember about your life, and that's Education of a Wandering Man. I am working on other things, but something to take very seriously about the Lost Treasures series is Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures is the professional biography. It's really specifically about Dad's career. I didn't go into very much personal detail about his personal life and things like that, but it's very much about his career. And it's been a wonderful step towards biography, because it gave me a chance to get all of this professional and career-oriented information out of the way. It was always something that was going to be just too big for a biography, and it really made my plans unmanageable. And so you could almost say that with LAmours, all the different pieces of LAmours Lost Treasures together, you could pretty much pretend like that's the beginning of a biography. If you read all of it, you'd have a pretty good idea of what Dad's work life was all about. So now let me back up and see what we've got here. So Leslie is saying, with this year's 3 editions, we get to about 28. How many more in the pipeline? 30 plus. I haven't counted, but there's still a few more to go. When I get done working on something, I hand it off to the publisher, and then it's over for me. And a lot of times they don't get around to it for a couple of years. And sometimes we decide that the order of things would be better, if we change the order from the order that I did them in. Like the walking drum was something that people were asking for a lot. And so we moved it up in the schedule from where it was, and we bounced a couple of others down. So we're always changing things around, and I'm always confused about exactly what we've done. Let's see what else we've got here. I'm sort of catching up with this. Richard says, "I wish more books were made into movies." Yep, so do I. It's not really up to us. It's up to the kind of people that release films. And now is not a good time. It's obviously because of COVID and everything, but I mean the political conditions of the studios and networks are weird right now. So I'm not really missing it. Any more information on Jubal? I don't think so, but I've only done one of the Sacketts. I was saving the Sackett books till last, and I haven't really gotten into that area. So when I get to the point where I'm researching the rest of the Sackett books, there might be something. Let's see. Mark Steinberg says, "Any chance of making full cast audios again?" I doubt it. I would love to, as you probably know, that was my baby, and I had so much fun. Doing it. With any luck, Paul and I will be recreating the first one of those that we ever did, which was Unguarded Moment, and we're gonna keep all of the voices. We're gonna keep all the actors' work, but we're gonna do hopefully we're going to redo the sound effects and the music and make it almost like a fresh production. And Dinesh says, "I would like to see Last of the Breed in a movie by a good director." Yes, so would I. I don't think that one will ever be done either. That project is kind of lost to history, but we can always hope. It was a lot of money was spent on it quite a long time ago, and I believe all of that money is still billed to that production. So it's very hard to make any money off of it with that, with those bills attached. So I think it's gotten to the point where it's too expensive to be made. And then let's see here. So Tim Nett says, "Hi Beau, when is the long version of Rivers West coming? Will there be Lost Treasures? Will there be Lost Treasures? I think it's Sackett books." So Rivers West, I have gone through and I have recreated Rivers West from the original, carbon copies that my dad had. It is in the pipeline. The publisher has it. It is not longer, at least not by very much. My dad, I think, had kind of an emotional, when he thought that a lot of pages had been cut out. I think that was more of his expressing his irritation with the editor. Not necessarily that much was cut out. And I have put back in everything that I could put back in to make it make sense. Rivers West was a strange situation. I think it hit right during the time when we moved from one house to another, and you could kind of see Dad's dislocation in there. And it's also possible that he couldn't get to his research materials, and he may not even have had access to the whole manuscript. I mean, things were very confused in 1973. So I think that was where some of the problem occurred. Then more of the problem occurred when a editor, I think probably at Doubleday, not Doubleday, Dutton's and Saturday Review Press got a hold of it, and so it is an upgraded version. A lot of the problems that were in the original book are fixed in a much more Louis appropriate way, and hopefully you'll be very happy with it. Let's see here, going down. Tracy Reby, good to see you, hear you, whatever. I hope you're doing well. Do you plan on making more books and films into films or TV series? Love to, but it's not necessarily up to us. A lot of times people will say, oh, if you had the money to do this movie or that movie or something else, it's like money isn't even an issue. The bottleneck in making movies is distribution. And is there a distribution slot? Is there a place in a television lineup? Is there a place in a feature film theatrical lineup to put something out? And so the distributors really control everything. In fact, if you have a distribution contract, you can just go and get a loan for that much money. So it isn't even money that's an issue. It's really distribution, and you're kind of hanging on the distributors. And so, that's up to them, not me. So let's see what else we have here. More people saying they'd like to have books made into movies. Yes, so would we. And Anthony says, I have trouble getting the Lost Treasures books in the UK. And I think that you need to, anytime you're having trouble getting the books, even if you're in a foreign country, get in touch with Paul at the LAmours Trading Post. So Paul at LAmours.com, and just get in touch with Paul. He's very good at managing really reasonably priced foreign shipping and things like that. And so hopefully he can help you out. David says, any more LAmours calendars? And the answer is no. We stopped doing that some time ago. They were really cool, but it would be nice, but we're not doing those anymore. We weren't really making any money after a while on them. And so let's see. Are there any books that we haven't seen yet, like No Traveler Returns? I'm not saying. So we just have to wait. Somebody says, Isaac says, I would love to see The Walking Drum. That probably means as a movie. Yeah, that'd be great. And unfortunately, my thing here keeps skipping around. So give me a chance. Did your dad have a favorite author he liked to read when he wasn't writing? Not really. He had some authors that he really admired that he'd read in the past. He was a big Jack London fan. But mostly when he was not writing, when he was reading for pleasure, if he wasn't reading nonfiction, which a lot of the time he was. If he wasn't reading nonfiction, he loved traditional mysteries like Agatha Christie and Ruth Randall and things like that. And one of the reasons was they were very, very far from what he was writing, so he was always pretty sure he wouldn't accidentally pick up some idea from one of those books and transplant it into one of his. And that you can do that unconsciously, or you can do that when you're just struggling for an idea for a story or something of the sort. And so fiction writers have to be very careful what they read because of those things. So he always liked to read things that were very different from from what he was writing. At the same time, certainly when I was a kid, he read me an awful lot of Edgar Rice Burroughs stories, and he really enjoyed those. He'd read them when he was a kid too, and so that was something he liked. And I believe he liked the Ross Macdonald kind of hard-boiled sort of noir mysteries. I know there were quite a few of them in his library that were, you could tell they were paperbacks, and you could tell they were read because the bindings were all broken and everything. So he'd definitely gone through and read those. Let's see what else we got here. David says another TV movie would be Down the Long Hills. Well, it was done. I won't say it was all that good, but it was definitely made. I actually worked for the company that made it, but I was working on another movie while they were making that one. So I actually got a chance to be there on the set of Down the Long Hills when they used that. They hired that terrific bear, the giant grizzly that was in The Bear and a number of other movies back in the 1980s. And I got to be there on one of the days when they were working with Bart the bear, which was fantastic. But I don't think it was necessarily a particularly good film. I believe it was made for Disney. Uh, and Doran says, can you tell us if more audiobooks will be published? Yes, absolutely. We've been going a little, we've been going a little slowly because COVID regulations are problematic for stuffing people in recording studios. So we've kind of toned it down a little bit, and we're just using actors that have home studios. And I don't know, but I think we might have even slowed down a bit from doing that because I was always worried about all the home studios sounding different and often sounding like you're in somebody's clothes closet because sometimes that's where they are. So hopefully, as COVID diminishes, we'll be able to get back into a production, a role that we can get back to doing 2 a year as we have been. And so Bendigo Shafter will be on the list. Almost every book that Louis wrote, I mean, with one or two exceptions, every book will be an audiobook. It's not really a question. Nobody's, I don't think there'd be any reason not to do something other than, like I said, one or two. And so we'll get around to them. Hopefully we'll get back on schedule and we'll be doing 2 a year. Let's see here. And then people are saying Ross McDonald is a favorite. Dinesh likes Flint as a character. Yeah, Flint is a terrific book. And is there an audiobook for The Walking Drum? Yes, there is. So you can, if you cannot find that, just remember LouisLamours.com or get in touch with Paul at LouisLamours.com, and he can make that happen. And now for a moment, we've run out of questions. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about No Traveler Returns. And so let's see here. I'm going to get to my notes about this because this is kind of interesting. My dad included coincidences in a number of books, some of them that bother people, some of them that don't. The fascinating thing about No Traveler Returns is it's a book that's all about the connections between people, the unlikely connections between people. It's just sort of a theme in the book. And when I was reading what Dad left behind, which was really a bunch of chapters that almost seemed like Yondering stories. So No Traveler Returns is a story in the Yondering series. So if you buy the book, especially the new Lost Treasures version of Yondering, all of the Yondering stories are in that one book, and I talk about it quite a bit and explain their relationships to one another. And No Traveler Returns is a part of that particular series, and it is the style of No Traveler Returns. I kind of jokingly, when I'm talking to people that I work with, I call it Louis 1.0. So this is Louis's original style, the first style that he wrote in, and it was somewhat different from the style of his pulp stories, which I jokingly call Louis 2.0, and then Louis 3.0 would be like the early Westerns up until maybe the late 1970s, very spare, pared down language, really excellent writing in my opinion. And And then Louis 4.0 would be books like The Walking Drum, his final rewrite of The Walking Drum, and some of the others. Bendigo Shafter would be a good example. And so he had these sort of four styles, and No Traveler Returns is in that first style. And one of the things that I did when I was working on it was find different ways to interrelate all those chapters to one another and make them more of a cohesive, whole, and make them work, together. I've had a couple of questions where people email me and they say, well, what exactly did you do to that? Did you just edit it? Did you rewrite it? Did you, I have to say it's really a book that the two of us worked on. I mean, Dad did all of his work on it back in the 1930s. I did all of my work on it in the 2010s, and it turned out very nicely. I mean, I was trying to present something that looked and felt very much like what Dad was doing in those days, and so like I was about to say, I have gotten some feedback from fans and things saying that they're very unhappy with it, and I think they're, hopefully what they're expressing is that they really wanted a Western, and we don't have any more Westerns. So that was the book that was unpublished. So now I'm going to go back to the questions here. Let's just see if there's some more. Will there be any more Sackett movies? I really doubt it. Again, the Sackett, the contracts on the Sacketts are quite complicated and problematic. There were a lot of players. I was in business for a while in the early 2000s with Doug Netter, who produced the Sacketts, and we tried very hard to unscramble everything and see if we could produce more stories, and it just didn't seem like it was going to happen. And we even had one of the many players coordinating with us and helping us out. So we got 3 out of 4 or 5 groups that had to get involved. So there was me, and there was Doug, and there was this other guy, and that was one representative from each of the groups, and we still couldn't get it made. So I don't think that's going to be something that happens. I wish it was, but probably not. Let's see here. Somebody says they read The Comstock Lode in a college class. That's very cool. That's Daniel Monahan. Thank you. I'm really glad you guys did that. I think the more we get into, the academic world, the better. And the more we get into English classes and things like that, the better. Doran says, I also liked Milo Talon very much, the book, I mean, although the Talon characters were always in a great book. So that's good. There's I believe it's the first story in LAmours Lost Treasures Volume 2 is the first couple of chapters of what would have been the first Talon book, and then there's a pretty good outline of what would follow that, just kind of the sense of the Talon history. So there is some more information out there. Let's see what other questions we've got. All right. Thank you. Somebody says they love Dad's book of poems. Will we ever see any more of those? If you have the more recent edition of the book of poetry, which has kind of a somewhat of an abstract kind of mountainous horizon on the cover, so it's the newer version, the maybe 1990 version, something like that, of Smoke from This Altar. It has quite a few extra poems in it from the original Smoke from This Altar. It's probably almost twice as big, almost twice as many poems. All right, and so we're getting to the end of our hour, even though I was pretty lame getting started. They changed. Facebook has got new controls every time we do, because we don't do this very often. Um, they update their controls for how you run Facebook Live, and then I go to do the Facebook Live and I fire it up, and it's sort of like, oh no, everything looks different. But I figured I would. I'll take a few more questions if they pop up. But and if somebody hasn't had their question answered, just throw it in there, because sometimes as I'm scrolling through, I miss stuff. But I'm gonna show you some photographs. So I pulled out a few photographs just from my dad's collection, because these are particularly cool. This one, let's make sure I tip it in the right way here so that you can see it well. That is the Panama Canal from the bow. That is the Panama Canal from the bow of a ship that my dad was on in 1926. And so I'll show that one more time here. That's his ship making its way through the locks at the Panama Canal, which is pretty cool. Here's a photograph of my dad up in the Sierras on one of his first, really one of his first research trips. This was probably in the 1940s. And I'll try and tip it to make it look a little bit better. There. And here he is camping out on the same trip. Let me again try and sort of get it all straightened out here. There we go. So that's a dad camping. He was out with his friend Ed Ross, and they traveled around Central and Northern California and the Sierras a little bit. And the last one that I've got is a photograph. This is Dad in New Mexico. And this is when he and my mom were out driving around, and he was doing the research for Shalico. And so this would have been in the late 1950s. Now, let's see if we got any more questions before I check out here. So somebody likes Haunted Mesa. Penny likes Haunted Mesa. I do too. I had a lot to do with Haunted Mesa, and I love that book. And there's a lot of interesting stuff in the Lost Treasures postscript to that book. And Alan says, I wish we could have had more about Brian and Noel Sackett. I do too. Let's see here. Are there any Sackett books that you're working on? Did your dad have any manuscripts underway to fill out the history of the Sackett family? No, he didn't. He had some very cryptic notes about how he would kind of fill out the series. But I think he felt like the writing the Sacketts was so second nature to him. It was something that he didn't really have to take that many notes on, and those stories were not stories that he started and set aside and then picked up again. A lot of the Lost Treasures stuff that we have, information on, we have that information because those were the stories that Dad had a hard time writing, and because he had a hard time writing, he took notes, and we could see him trying to work out the problems he was having. Or he would start a story and he would not quite know where it was going, and then he would back up, and sometimes he would start it again. I mean, there's a couple of them in the Lost Treasures Volume 1 and 2. I didn't print every different or publish every different draft, but I mean, there were some that ran 10, 20 drafts where he was trying to get the first couple of chapters started. And those were often the stories that he was having that were the most ambitious stories. And so, those are very interesting because they were the stories that were pushing him the hardest. And I think he found writing the Sacketts to be so easy that he really didn't leave behind too many notes. And so let's see what else we've got here. David says, hope you and your family have navigated safely through all this COVID stuff. Yeah, it's been a pain, but we're doing okay. Luckily, we all work at home and things like that, and so it hasn't really been too rough. And then let's see here. A number of people are thanking you. You're really welcome. I really love doing this, and we tend to do them in the fall, so there'll be a few more before the end of the year. Let's see. So here's somebody who wrote a little extra. All right. Did your dad ever consider following up on the series Haunted Mesa was based on? Well, there isn't really a series. Haunted Mesa is something like, so the two books that are similar to Haunted Mesa, if you're truly talking about Haunted Mesa, there were two books that were a little bit similar to it. One of them was The Californios, and the other one is the first story in Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures, Volume 1, which is the first couple of chapters of it's kind of a Western horror story, but when you get to the point where I'm discussing the notes and where the story was going to go, you see that it was also one of these odd kind of interdimensional travel type stories where there were touches of that in the Californios, and there was quite a bit of it in Haunted Mesa. I may have mentioned something about a series on Haunted Mesa in the past because I adapted it about 15 years ago to be a television series, and you can read a little bit of that information. There's only a page or so of it, but in the Louis L'Amours Lost Treasures.com website, there's a lot of really cool stuff there if you dig into the site deeply enough. So there are many of the unfinished works and notes and things like this that we rejected, and we didn't want to put them in the Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures Volume 1 and 2. So this was the stuff that wasn't, maybe quite as good or quite as interesting or quite as complete as what went into the books. We didn't really feel like it was appropriate to, charge money for it because it wasn't quite up to our standards. But it's still there for reference. So you can dig into that site and see those. There's a lot of great photographs on that site. There are reading lists. There are basically every book my dad read from the 1930s to the 1980s are listed on that site because he kept very, very good notes of all the books that he read. There's and in one of the sections there is a some of the film and television proposals that I did over the years. And so there's a little bit that touches on Haunted Mesa there. Let's see. Sarah named their son Tell. That's terrific. Yeah, she says Louis used great names in all her books. There was a wonderful editor and publisher that I worked with a long time ago, and she made this kind of fantastic comment. She says she could always tell a good book or a good manuscript because the character names were good. She says when a writer has really good character names or really appropriate for the character or for the time period or something, character names, that's an indication that they're really tuned in and they really know what they're talking about. And so yeah, I think that Dad did a great job with that. He had a collection of books. A great big set of books. It was all of the dispatches both from the North and the South, every official dispatch for the entire Civil War. Huge, I think it was 110 volumes, enormous thing. He dipped into it occasionally, but the one book of those that really he used quite a bit was the index for the whole series, because of course it was full of names, and he got a lot of his 19th century names by mixing and matching names that he found in the index for the Civil War dispatch series. And let's see here. Every time I touch this thing to scroll, it jumps. I have to go back and find where I was. Sorry about that. Hang on. Oh, here we've got some stuff. Great names. Antony lives in the UK near the Fens, or he visited the Fens where Barnabas Sackett came from. That's wonderful. And then, let's see. So Troy asks, how much time did he spend researching each book as he wrote them? Not very much. So Dad was engaged in ongoing research all the time. So he was kind of collecting ideas and doing a lot of research constantly. So he didn't necessarily go in and research an individual book a tremendous amount. He also tended to write books about often places where he had lived, but often also places that he had visited. And so sometimes he would go back and revisit those physical locations. But he didn't sort of stop work and go off and research or do an awful lot of research, and then say, okay, now I've got the research, now I'm going to write the book. It was kind of an ongoing process that was just throughout his entire life. So let's see here. What's your favorite movie based on your father's books? Hard to say. I think that Hondo was a terrific movie for its time period. I'm a big fan of Conager. I worked on a couple. It's hard for me to kind of go, oh, I really like this movie that I worked on, because you know all the horror stories of that of that particular film, and so it's a little difficult. But I would say, really, if you're looking, especially if you're looking at the stories in context, in the historical context, historical Hollywood context, Hondo is a favorite of mine, and I don't know. I'm always hoping for the future. I don't think that my dad's really, for all the work that he had made into films, I don't think that he had very many good films made, and I would like to change that, but there is something about his work that does not lead to terrific film adaptations, and of course, again, like I said, I'd like to change that, but we'll have to see. Ron asks, any chance of all the books being made by Franklin Library or Easton Press? His books deserve it. Well, thanks. We did that Leatherette series for so long. I think that a different special packaging is not something that's going to happen for a while, until there seems to be more demand for it. But of course, anything like that would make me happy. Make his books kind of live forever in robust hardcover format, which would be terrific. Hang on, scrolling down. I just keep getting lost here. Here we go. Okay, and so Doran says, will you write your own books? Like writing books from scratch, not necessarily something Louis started? Yeah, probably. I have this work that I have to do now, and it's very satisfying for me. I'm not somebody who says, yes, I need to, I need to be the person to see my name up in lights or anything like that. And so if this is an easy way to do good, solid work where, I'm taking care of my family and things like that, I'm very happy to, I'm very happy to do it. Um, and so let me skip back up here. Cheryl says, I love it when he mentions where I live, Mojave Desert, Joshua Tree, Palm Springs. Yeah, that was a really favorite part of my dad. One of my dad's favorite parts of the world was the low desert and the Coachella Valley and things like that. My mother, her family was kind of located down there. They had a lot of land around La Quinta, and so he spent a lot of time down there from the time they married in the 50s until they sold that land when I was a kid, maybe the early 70s. And so he really had he had lived in the California desert, for quite a while when he wrote a lot about it. And then David says, I read a lot of confusing stuff about Hondo. Some say he based it off of a script, or did he truly write the book before the movie? So that is something I'm going to tell you, but that is, if you want that story at its most complete, you need to get the LAmours Lost Treasures version of Hondo, which has a whole, kind of article that I wrote about that in the back of it. That's the postscript, and this is the kind of stuff that's in the Lost Treasures postscripts. So Dad wrote the short story Gift of Cochise, or The Gift of Cochise, and it was at a time when the pulp magazines were failing, and he was in more and more trouble financially because he had been very prolific, but he was having not a lot of opportunities to sell the stories that he had written, and he sold. He tried to sell the story to his old friend and editor at Standard Magazines, Leo Margulies, and Leo didn't have a place for it, couldn't take it. So he passed it off to an agent that he knew and kind of forgot about it because the agent wasn't very productive. He didn't get stuff done to much of an extent. And he went on kind of struggling to make it. This is the same time period when Dad wrote the four Hopalong Cassidy novels, which he wouldn't have done, probably if he'd had other options, but they were something that Leo Margulies threw to him as a financial bone to help him make it through the year. And lo and behold, the editor actually sold Gift of Cochise to Collier's, which was a terrific magazine, and they paid many times what the Standard Magazine rate was. But the problem with what they call the slick magazines like Collier's and the Saturday Evening Post was they wouldn't publish a story until they felt that it fit into a particular issue of the magazine really well. So there needed to be other stories like it, or it needed to be a mixture of stories, and this was the one story that that was different. Maybe they wanted to have a mystery and a western and this and that, whatever it is. So when the editors felt like they had the right mixture of stories, they would then put the story in the magazine, and the slick magazines didn't pay you until they published it, and they could sit on it forever. So he sold the story to Collier's, but he didn't get any money for it, or he didn't get any money for it right away. But because he had sold the story to Collier's, it was looked at more seriously, and his agent, different agent, was able to go out and, push it in front of different people. And somehow it got to a particular old actor who optioned it for a while and then lost the option. But at some point in there, I think he had shown it, or he had spoken about it to John Wayne, because he had worked on a whole bunch of movies with Wayne. And then Wayne picked up Gift of Cochise, and they started the process of getting ready to produce the movie Hondo. And as soon as they gave Dad the money for the option, which is like where they rent your story to see if they can make a movie out of it, as soon as they gave Dad the option money on Hondo, and that was almost the same time that Saturday Evening Post finally committed to when they were going to publish the story, and they gave him some money for that too. So he was in a very bad way. He took that money, paid off his debts, jumped on a plane, went to New York, and barged into the office of every publisher and every editor he could find and said, "Look, I've got a movie coming out with John Wayne, and I'm your guy for Westerns. And so I've got Western novels to sell." He had a couple kind of, in the drawer, ready to go. He had a couple of Western novels that had been published in magazines, but they were novel length that he could sell to the paperback book publishers. And he sold four novels on that trip, and really set himself up as Louis L'Amour, the Western writer. He'd written a lot of Westerns before that, but he had never really said, "Okay, I'm going to be the Western guy," until that particular moment. And so one of the things that he discussed on that trip was a movie tie-in novel to Hondo. So the interesting thing here is the movie tie-in novel was his idea. It wasn't the movie studio going around and saying, "Okay, we're going to get a publisher to do this." He pitched it to a publisher and was able to land that particular contract. So Dad wrote the short story, then it was sold as a movie, then the screenwriter worked on it and collaborated a little bit with my dad. I don't think very much on exactly what was going on in the movies. You never see, the original short story or novelist writer and the screenwriters never seem to get together very much. But Dad was probably the guy that suggested the new name for the character. So in the short story, the guy's name is Ches Lane, and he's Hondo Lane in the novel. And Dad suggested the name Hondo because he had just finished writing a short story called One Night Stand. And there's a character in One Night Stand called the Hondo Kid. And so he sort of picked up part of that name and talked to the production company about it. And so it was very much a collaboration between, there was Dad's short story, there was the screenplay, the movie, and then I'm pretty sure Dad had all the book written before the film came out, certainly before he ever saw it, because he didn't see it till it was in the theaters. So it's a complicated story, but anybody who said that Dad didn't create that is someone who hasn't done adequate research or read my Lost Treasures postscript to the book Hondo. All right, let's see what else we got here. Try and get to all of these. Before we sign off here. Janet says, "Haunted Mesa is my favorite, made me delve into the history of the Anasazi at a young age and later travel to places he mentions." I'm going to recommend a book if you're into that. There's a great book called House of Rain, which is a terrific book about sort of exploring the origins of the Anasazi and the story of the Anasazi. And Albert says, I stayed in the Strater Hotel in Durango. They have a room dedicated to your dad above the saloon. Do you have any memories there with your dad? Yep, plenty. I'm not sure that I have anything that I would say, okay, here's the fantastic memory. It was a terrific place to stay for vacations in the summer. It was sort of right above the Diamond Bell Saloon, and so there was kind of ragtime piano coming up through the floor every night, and Durango's a terrific place. So, I have lots of very, very fond memories, but probably no great stories. And let's see if there's anything else. Okay. All right, so I think we've gotten to the end of it, and I'll be signing off, but I thank all of you. We'll be doing a couple more of these this year. And I wish everybody to be safe and healthy and happy and, take care of yourselves. And hopefully we'll do this again fairly soon. Take care and have a good night.